Hi, my name is Benedict. Today's a mix walkthrough, but it's a little bit more than that. It's actually showing me completing a piece that was sent to me in an idea form. The artist's name is Little Timmy. You may have heard me mention Travis. That's Travis, he's Little Timmy, and he'd written a track which he'd tentatively just as a working name called License, and he'd come up with a few bars, but he's really struggling with knowing how to move forward. And his questions to me were, hey Benedict, can you help me mix this? Because I think I'm going to feel better about completing it if it's better mixed. And I kind of get that, because you sort of feel like, oh, but if I had the sounds right, then I'd know what to do. But I actually declined on that because I know that it's a trap. That if you put your focus into mixing, thinking that you've got to have the right sounds before you can write the right piece of music, you get yourself stuck. Whereas my reaction to Little Timmy was, hey, we can't mix this because we don't know what the piece is about yet. You haven't got a sense of story, the piece is not finished. We don't know where we're aiming with this mix. We don't know what's important in this mix. Easier to say, oh, but it's obvious it's the fucking kick drum, man, because it's fucking techno and that's what you fucking do. But that's kind of stupid because we don't know what the piece is until it's finished. And it's getting that sense of, well, what's the story, what's the vision here that tells the mix engineer how to mix it. Listen carefully to great records. Last night I was listening to Neil Young's Powderfinger record. Sorry, not Powderfinger, it's got the song Powderfinger on, Rust Never Sleeps record, which is largely an acoustic record, but there are some real crunchy guitar parts and rocky things in there. But particularly the first part of the record, you really hear the engineer working with the material that he's got, which was fairly roughly recorded. But he said, okay, this is what makes this song great. This is what I'm going to make the most of. And that's how a producer mix engineer should be working. So I said to Little Timmy, no, not going to work that way. He then said, hey, can you help me finish my piece? My first reaction was like, no, man, that's your piece. Hey, my piece. But then I thought about it overnight, and I thought, well, yeah, he is struggling, like a lot of people struggle with getting that sense of basic loop and then not knowing what to do with it. And that's a real problem. I've addressed it a few times, but here's great because I can actually show taking an idea and running with it. The reason I was concerned was because I'm not going to write like Little Timmy because I ain't Little Timmy. I'm Big Fat Benedict. He's got a genre style that he was chasing, which I'm not strong in. It seemed like two bad ideas. But then I thought overnight and I thought, no, this is a good idea. There's a good idea in here. Because when he sent me his basic thing, I thought there's a good idea in here. I'd like to hear it developed. Timmy wasn't comfortable with developing it yet. So what does that leave him? The option of going, I'll kind of die with it, which doesn't work out very well for him, or me, because I don't get to mix a track that didn't get finished. Or I can say, okay, I'm going to do the Benedict thing to it. There are things in this idea that I heard and liked. I can show Little Timmy a way of developing it. It doesn't have to be the only way this piece can be developed, because other people who feel differently could take this and develop it differently. But I thought, well, no, there's still an awful lot to be learned, even if you don't personally love the outcome, and I understand Little Timmy does like this outcome, in that you can still see the thinking behind what I did. So what we've ended up with is what we've ended up with. And it's a valid expansion of that core idea. So let me start with, seeing I've taken up some of your time already, here's the core idea that I've got. I like that. I very first listened to it on my phone, which generally I don't do, but it came over whilst I was in my TV watching time, and Jane went to wash the dishes or whatever, and because it wasn't my turn because I'd cooked. And so I thought, oh, let's see what we've got. And it was actually good because the phone got rid of our bass mix issues and just gave me the content. And that, well, what I've turned into a lead line, for him it was a 303 lead that he sort of forced into somewhere between a bass line and a lead. I really liked that. I thought that had cool feel. I liked the pulsing 80s type bass line, and I liked the sort of vocally sound as well. So some cool ideas in here which I did want to see developed. And so I thought, well, okay, that's the feel I got from this. Timmy doesn't have a sense of story to attach to this, and I've got to take some time to explain what I mean when I say the word story, because people often get the wrong idea on that, which is unfortunate, and develop it. So we'll start by me actually playing what is the final piece. I've given it another name because license just isn't an inspiring image. So it's gotten itself another name, which helps give a stronger sense of, well, what's the art in this? The name is The Plane Rider, Plane, The Plane Rider. The idea being that sort of purpley retro wave, because if you haven't already worked it out, there's a lot of Knight Rider in this. I deliberately didn't want to play directly to that. It'd be very easy to say, let's basically get as close as we can to cloning that. Very bad call. I've generated something that picks up some of that feel, but it's different. Let's have a listen. So there you have it. An idea developed out to a piece. I deliberately didn't go overboard in terms of creating more parts. It's still close to a one-idea piece. Not entirely, because I'm loath to do too much in the way of one-idea pieces. They're sometimes useful as little dividers in albums. Sometimes you really do only have one idea, but if you stretch one idea out past about 2 minutes, you're really pushing things uphill in terms of keeping a listener interested. And nor did I want to show Travis developing a track with either far too many new ideas for him to sort of get his head around. Sorry, little Timmy. With far too many new ideas to get his head around, because it takes time to learn to develop and have variations and various ideas in a piece, so I didn't want to overdo it there. But I also didn't want to underdo it by just giving the illusion that you make a piece by having an 8-bar loop, piling up 28 tracks, and then just shuttling them out and calling it an arrangement, saying, oh, well, the bass will play over here, and then the piano will play here, and the pinball machine will play there. That's not an arrangement. It's just spreading shit out. And people can hear that in a mix when your whole piece is just turning stuff on and off. There's some value in it, but it's not a piece. You haven't got variety. So let's dig a little bit into what happened here. Travis sent me 2 reason files. One had each of the lines just rendered, so basically stems, and the other was his raw file. There was a problem for me in working in each one. One of them gave me exactly the sounds that he'd got, but none of the notes and what have you. The other gave me all the raw MIDI notes, but most of the sounds were missing, because he'd used devices that he has and I don't. I did for half a second think, oh, well, his sounds are kind of cool. Should I work out how to use them? But I quickly worked again. This was going to see me try and go down somebody else's road, which is a fail. And I know people think, well, you're a producer. You should be able to do this in whatever style it was. Just like, fuck off. If you want to hire Hans Zimmer, guess what? There's a guy called Hans Zimmer. Go hire the guy. He does pretty good work. So I don't know why you wouldn't want to hire him. If you want to hire Hans Zimmer, but you don't want to pay Hans Zimmer, then you've got a whole other issue. Hire somebody you do like. And I get if you can't afford to pay Hans Zimmer, and this is nothing to do with Timmy, we haven't talked about this, but I cop this as a movie guy. People come to me and say, I want you to do this score just like Hans Zimmer. I want you to do this like John Williams. It's like, I know hiring John Williams is a bit tricky these days, but hiring Hans Zimmer is not that hard. It's just expensive. But that's for a pretty fair reason, because he's good at what he does and he's got a great track record. But if you've come to me, you should want what I do. Otherwise, you're shooting yourself in the foot. So, back to the real point of this, but that explains why this is a real point, is that for me to make this work, I've got to make it work my way. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. We're going to end up with something truly cack. Whether you like this or not, this is not truly cack. If it's your opinion that it's cack, it's your opinion, and you're welcome to it. But this isn't cack. It would be, however, if I tried to work as though I were somebody else. That wouldn't work out for any of us. So it'd be a fail. So it's like, okay, those sounds are interesting. I could try and sample them up and try and... But no. What interested me was Little Timmy's idea. Little Timmy's idea was cool. Some of the sounds were cool too, but I've been doing this for 30 years. I can get close enough. So I went into his rack. Let's close this off. His rack I did find confusing. There wasn't method in his madness. There was just a little bit of mess in his madness. Sorry, Timmy, but there was mess in your madness. Most things... Let's see here. Let's take the white snare. He's got his synth, pushing it through a scream, great. But then he paralleled a phaser into a chorus and paralleled a reverb. So there may be a very good reason that he'd done this, but would you just not put your scream into your phaser, into your chorus, into your reverb? Why are they paralleled? He'd made his choices on this. It means that the reverb doesn't carry the phaser and the chorus signal. Maybe that was a deliberate choice. I don't know. I kind of kept it because I was happy enough with the sounds that I was getting through that. Plus, it was there for me to show. But if it wasn't done for a deliberate reason, and all of his instruments were done this way, every single one of them, they're all done this way, with extra parallels, and commonly paralleling something like a chorus, and the chorus was left in mix mode, so 50-50 mixed at another level. Now, if that's deliberately trying to say, yeah, I want to use that chorus device because I really like the sound of it, I quite do, but I didn't want to be stuck with a 50-50 mix level, then a parallel is a good choice. But otherwise, you're just getting, let's say, 50-50 it's a quarter chorus. If that's what you're after, great. If not, it's like kind of mess. It's being producery because you're afraid of pushing forward, is what I felt like was happening here. Obviously, I'm guessing, and we didn't have a conversation about this kind of deliberately. Happy to hear what the reason was, but it's not a case of having a go. It's just a case of try to be more organized. Because if you've got a clutter in your workspace, then that clutter is actually going to take a fair amount of your energy that you're trying to use to push forward and be creative. You get caught in a lot of mess, a lot of greebliness. So don't put stuff in your racks if they're not being used. There were quite a few things in the rack that weren't being used. They shouldn't be there. He had a logic that seemed to be each instrument created a whole new rack. So he had racks going out to the end of the world. If that works, great. My logic is that I tend to put my kick and bass, like the true rhythm stuff, in my first rack. In this case, he's got a lot of drum type things, so I put them all in one rack. Then I put the bass in the top of this one. Normally it would go over there. And then my musical instruments in here, and third rack for sound effecty instruments. All comes down to what your logic is. That's my logic. It makes it tidy. But if you find that you're struggling with it feels like I'm overwhelmed, don't make it complex. Because the moment you think that making it more complex, more producery, is going to help, you're lost. You can add in producery shit later when you've got a real purpose for it. But don't add producery shit at the beginning to feel special, because all you do is tie your ankles together before you go on a running race. Not good call. But I liked a lot of what we had here. So I started with the kick. I didn't have the instrument. Started to come up with a new one. Little Timmy had a very EDM type kick. It's fine. I'm no bloody good at making them. But there was a feel that I liked in the piece, so I said, okay, what if I create something new? And my gut just said to me, you don't want to do this the usual way you do. Grab a grain and whack that sample in it. Go with these things. I've been doing this for 30 years, so I've got some sense of a lot of stuff. That's called intuition. Creativity. It's intuition, because I've done this before. And it didn't take me long before I had a sound that it has that whole I'm a great big electronic drum, but it's got a whole other feel to it. It's like, ooh, this is this great heavily processed sample. It's not. It's just white noise using a high-pass filter with an envelope. Because these envelopes, the main envelopes, are not super fast in Europa and grain, I used these envelopes here. So I set these to a longer value and then used these envelopes to control filter and, in this case, the amp. So I ended up with a character sound, and that was my aim right from the beginning. This sound has to have real character, because it plays, and at halftime, I have no problems with that. Some people go like, but that's weird, man. If you're at 128 BPM, you've got to have one on the fourth. Piss off. It plays at halftime, or we're at 140 BPM. We're at sort of halftime. Nothing wrong with that at all. This gave me the advantage of being able to play this sound elsewhere. You hear it at the beginning like a sound effect. And it has a kind of vocal quality. It's got a pa in it, which matches this snare sound. Sorry, not the snare sound. Bad me. It matches what I call the vocal hat. It's just... So my kick and one of the other sounds in the mix now have a similarity in their sounds. One of the problems with just grabbing random samples, oh, that's my favourite kick drum sample, that's my favourite snare drum sample, is they don't necessarily have cohesion. You can do things to make them cohese, but you may be doing unnecessary work. If you get good at building things from scratch, then you can say, I like this about this, let's build something that has those characteristics. So, kick drum was done. It's triggered more from a Euclid rhythm generator. Okay, fair enough, go for it, had no argument. I did put a compressor on this guy. It's just... sounds fine without it. But with a long attack, what it's doing there is, you'll see the shape that I gave the attack here has quite a long hold on the beginning. So it's just turning down the longer part ever so smidgely, because while it sounds great on its own, remember we never work with things in solo, in a mix it was worth saying, here I am at the beginning, but just pulling it back a little bit, because otherwise with such a long sound, it can mess with everything else in the mix. I know EDM mixes tend to be pretty darned open, and Timmy and I had a week's conversation about psytrance, and how incredibly nothing there is in the mix, so that they can have this world's biggest kick drum and the world's biggest bass line, and they never play at the same time. But nonetheless, you've still got something else in your mix. We've made our point with the beginning of kick drum sound. I still want it to be long, but I want to just move it out ever so slightly. Let it be graceful. When you're dancing with a partner, you make you move, and you move out of their way as well, so that they can do their half of the dance. First sound I made, kick. Because it's sort of central to what he's doing, and I wanted it to be a character kick. Normally I'd make them a lot later in the process. This vocal hat normally plays fairly quickly. And in this case I had the subtractor. That came across. But maybe it didn't. No, sorry, I think maybe it didn't. I think it was another sound, but nonetheless I knew where I wanted to go. So I made a kind of a hi-hatty sound. That's not where the magic is. The magic is then in a vocal feel that came into it. So I did that with adding a little bit of resonator, not too much, because otherwise it just started to howl. We don't want that howl, so it's quite subtle. Those resonations are quite subtle. Generally I tried to use devices that Timmy or anybody else has access to easily, but I knew that my space tone was going to be a bit of a shoe-in for this, because we wanted to really, in an aggressive, unbalanced way, change the tone. So I rolled off some of the lows, pushed the mids, pulled back some of the highs, pushed up the peak. Basically, this is 3 filters, synth filters, put into one box. So that's become a big part of the sound to help get that and scream, because we know we don't want a lot of the bottom end on this. That stuff down there, not what we wanted. So hack it off. And a good way to help hack it off is actually with the overdrive in this. It tends to create a toppier sound. You hear it changes the lows there, but gives us a nice bit of extra something there. And a bit of reverb. I know some people will be incensed at using a low quality reverb, but it suits the feel of these sounds tremendously well. The white snare. Now this was the one that did come across, because it was based on a subtractor. It was pushed through some effects, I think, that I don't have. Same with the vocal hat was pushed through effects I don't have. And it's making my own. This is paralleled. I was more than happy to use these, but because they were paralleled, as I said before, I put the chorus and the phaser into 100% wet signals, so they gave us more move. Because remember, we've also got this reverb that's applied here, which I also transferred to 100% wet. There didn't seem a lot of sense in mixing dry signal back with itself, unless you're deliberately after some kind of flangey type thing, but I don't think that happens in this case. So our white snare. EQing here was again to cut off the stuff we don't want. Soloed, it might sound nice with that whoop underneath it. In a mix where we've got a pretty heavy kick drum, not cool, make it go away. So, as we got through the mix, then I found that I wanted to boost that sound. So I've made these sounds with just the basics of the mix, brought in these extra sounds. Now what did I do with these? Oh, I made these my own. They were a Roland 505 kit, I think, from Kings of Kong. Nothing against the sounds. They suited well in his own context, but I decided with those extra sounds, seeing I was going my way, I was going to make sounds that were very consistent with the Benedict sound. So the same with just an extra hi-hat and a side stick. He put them into different devices, which honestly I personally find messy. I kind of get the logic in that you can process each separately, but I'd be a little bit more, put them in here and use your outputs. Horses for courses, but if I can use one device, 2 mixer channels, I'm far more happy than using 2 devices and 2 mixer channels. You'll call which way you go, but to me, that would be a messy decision. Baseline. Now, he'd used the ABL3, which is a pretty decent TB303 doohickey. I don't have that fella, but I know you can get quite a lot of that kind of stuff out of Subtractor. But as soon as I put this in and said, okay, well, what are we going to do with it? I decided to go in a slightly different direction. So our baseline, let's just soloify it. Beginning, Timmy's original bass sound was really, really super low. Now I see this a lot when people are composing, and quite honestly it goes the wrong way. What's a bass line for? Now I hear a lot of you saying, to make my sub, make my kidneys do this. I am super sorry for you, because that is not the right answer. Like, super sorry for you. This is why you struggle with your mixes and even with your composing. Because to make your sub do this, it's got to be super fucking loud. And that's okay when you're at a rave and they're pumping out 20 bazillion watts at you. That can allow the subs to do this. But if you're listening at anything approaching less than jet airplane volume, to get your sub to do this, you've got to be very fucking loud. And the only way to do that, seeing you have a limited bandwidth between about minus 48 dB, which people will perceive as silence, and 0 dB, which you cannot exceed, you don't have a lot of space, especially seeing you're going to want to jam other things in as well. Therefore, if your bass wants to be doing this to a sub, it needs to be too loud that it's going to swallow everything. It's going to swallow your lovely kick drum, it's going to swallow your hi-hats, it's going to swallow everything. It might sound okay as you're initially working on it because you've got nothing else in your mix and you can solo it, and you can turn the sound system up and you can watch your cones do this, and you can feel very, very godly in your own little sense in your basement, but I'm in a garage. The reality is when you come to try and finish your piece and fill the mix, you're going to have a lot of problems. So, what is your bass line there to do? Seeing it's not there to move subs like this, it's there to underpin the piece. Like the melodic structure of your piece, and it has to have a melodic structure, believe me. It underpins that, and it provides punch. Perhaps more like a foot kick, but I'm not going to stand up right now and start doing roundhouse kicks. Because A, I'm not very good at them, and B, it's just not necessary. They are providing punch. That is what your bass is there to do. If you're running your kick to do the same as well, great, in which case you've got to balance the pair of them. But Travis did notice with an early version of this that I sent over last night, oh, you lifted the bass line up. No, I didn't. It's actually the same notes. I just didn't jam it right down there kind of territory, because we're going to have a lot of problems developing the piece. So I lift it. So we get a nice sound. That's got that really cool Kim Wilde's brother, sound and feel to it. Using subtractor gives us that cool, really tight, Rolandy sort of sound. Pop that through. A scream again in the overdrive mode. And you know that I said it kind of tends to strip the lows out of things. Yep. But it really pushes the punchy, bright 106 Alpha Juno kind of feel out of that. Again, he's got his parallels and the lead. Sorry, this is the one. No, sorry, my bad. The bass line was a bass line, and it might have been subtractor in the first place. I can't remember. But the lead definitely was the ABL. That was the 303 clone. It sounded great, and I was a little bit like, what am I going to do with that? And that's where I did initially think, I should use a subtractor because it can do a decent 303. Then I thought, no, I'm going to go in another direction. I have to go in another direction with this, because trying to emulate his sound too closely was just going to cause me problems. So what Timmy had done was he had his ABL, his 303 machine. He whacked it through a pair of screams, one into another, a distortion into a tube. I didn't change any of this, because when I put in Europa, just with a sine wave, and put it through these two, hello. So a lot of the sound that he'd gotten out of that 303, the ABL, was actually these pair of screams, putting a distortion into a tube. I've done that a couple of times, a couple of layers of scream, and boy can you get some cool stuff. And boy did he get something cool. This fitted in quite nicely. It's got quite a lot of the elements of what his sound was. Obviously, this is a cool chain. But I could also hear quite a lot of feel of early Kraftwerk. By early, I mean before Electric Cafe. So that was cool with me. That's a very Benedict kind of a feel to have. I then had to put in delay line. He'd got this alligator running. I thought, I'm not going to mess with it. I'm going to let it go. I muted it a little bit later and realised it's actually a lot of what defines his sound. So mad to get rid of that. It stayed. So I've now got a pretty nice working structure for what we've got. Again, we've got his doubling ups. I left it there. It wasn't my perfect way of doing it, but I left it there. I did whack a compressor on it though. And you'll see I went straight for the jugular in terms of timing. I wasn't super aggressive in terms of the ratio, but pulled our threshold a fair bit down, drove it to make sure that we were going hard, and then just chopped off the top. We want this sound to really be forward, because it's a pretty forward sort of sound with that layers of drive, and it wants to spear through the mix. So that's what we did. That covered everything that he'd written, basically, to that point. We then had to expand. So it took an hour or so to actually recreate, or to create sounds and recreate where he'd got to. It was with his MIDI and everything like that. We then introduced a new sound. Just seemed such an obvious thing, you know, if you don't use a kind of quacky Roland analog synthesizer brass, you're just not doing it right. This one took a fair time to make. I'm fussy about my brass sounds. I love brass. And it took me a fair time to make, and I came back to it a few times. Ended up using I was trying to do this kind of thing to even get a little bit of DX7 kind of feel. It wasn't working, because that relies on the lower end, and the lower end's super busy already. I just wanted that quack that you get out of the sound. So a bandpass is a great way of doing it, and raise the resonance, which really shows, hey, I'm using a quacky, filtery sound. And so we got this line. I often myself tend to do brass lines that are melodic like that, but in this case it's quite an 80s feel. So the obvious thing is to do the chord type stuff that is done there. So create a simple little sort of chord line of what it is, put it through the chorus, because that's just the right sound. Echo, we're good to go. I finished the piece with all the other sounds except for this fella here. Listened to it overnight in the lounge room, which has a sub and a cheap Sony system that's got towers and a sub, and wouldn't find a 1 kilohertz test tone if you actually put a Google pin on it. But it's nice for general music listening. It's flattering, and I use it to check my mixes. So I've watched an evening of TV, blowing up aliens, killing hipsters, all the things you do to feel good about life, and feel a bit cleansed of having spent hours in here. Listened to it, and I felt like, yeah, I really like what's going on, but the leads in both cases, which is the original lead here and the brassy one, they need a little bit more, just a little bit of something, not to change them, but just to give them a little bit more majesty. And I could feel that that needed to be somewhere between a string and a super sorry pluck thing. So that was the first thing this morning to actually work on that. So what gives that sort of sound very quickly and easily would have been Thor, but now it's Europa. This allows me to answer a question that Timmy gave me. He said, I struggle with getting pads to fit in. Alright, we're back. Sorry about that little interruption there. My camera decided to do a swan dive. So, where were we? Yes, Timmy said, I struggle to make pads fit in. I know how you feel, Timmy. I've had those moments myself, and often they have driven my sound. Rather than say I don't know how to do it, I've taken the attitude of, I don't know how to do it different, but I'll do it this way, to allow myself to keep moving. I tell you that because that's super important. I see too many people go, I don't know how to do it perfectly, therefore I won't do it at all. Whereas I've always tended to have more of the attitude of, I don't know how to do it the way every other person does it, but I want it enough, I'll just do it anyway. Go that way. Now, in terms of making pads fit in heavy mixes, even though this isn't a heavy track, it's a heavy mix because we've got a huge kick drum, big bass lines, therefore a big busy mix. What we look to solve is how to get a pad sound fit in, and here's where I had to do that. Let's just pull this guy up, give you a sense of what we got. Now this sound was made to be relatively innocuous, which pads kind of are, but it still had this role of filling in where the other sounds didn't quite have the beef that I wanted them to have. You know, they lost some power and melodic drive, which is the same thing. So you look at the profile of that sound, it's taking up a fair amount of space. If it was brighter, it'd be taking up an awful lot more. Then we bring in this guy. What have I done? I've put a couple of aggressive filters on, high and low pass filters, more aggressive than these guys, using this guy, the Omega Trimmer, which is a freebie. On its own, it doesn't do anything interesting at all, but I commonly sell its gain for a lot of things, but where I want to use aggressive top and tail on frequency range, this is well worth any amount of money that you spend on it. If you've got another device that gives you these options, great, go use it. If not, get this guy. So, lop off all the lows. You see, I'm real high. I'm at 500. I'm up here is where it's starting to roll off. Now that's important because we've got plenty going on in the mix underneath there. This does not want to be filling that. It's filling higher sounds. Tempting to say, oh, but I need all those highs to make it sound great. But remember what the first lead sound is? That's really bright. Really bright. So we don't want to be competing with what makes that sound unique. We're here to fill it. By doing that, we've of course made the sound quieter overall. You know, it's taking up this range at this volume. We've taken up this range, which means that effectively it's pumping out less level. So it actually lets us turn it up, which is great. Not that we want to turn it up, because commonly with pads we need to turn them down to get them back in the mix. But if we cut off the bits that we have no use for and do it fairly aggressively, we can fill a sound out, which is what pads are for, to fill out a mix, without people necessarily directly saying, oh, listen to that sound. But your sounds will sound great. This is an old technique from string machines. Krumars, Logan string machines, any of those sorts of things where you'd have this guy playing like a whole fistful of notes to try and fill out the sound of the rock band, what have you. But the mix engineer was commonly doing this to that sound, which is why when you first grab them and put them in your mix and you go, that doesn't sound right. It sounds like all this ugly shit's going on. Narrow down what frequency band you're playing with. Not kindly, not politely, hack it off, top and bottom. And that's why when you listen to a lot of those records from late 70s, early 80s with string machines in them, that string sounds so wonderfully narrow. It's because it is. They just said, this is the space we're going to give you. You can play as many notes as you want, but they're going to play here. Kind of like a band pass, only relatively square. That is how you start to bring bigger pads things into an otherwise already overly busy mix. Throat pad, this sort of new sounds. So we've got 3 oscillators. This one has pulse width modulation, that's just set to a narrow pulse. And the third one's just running an octave below. Everything goes through a filter and then through this formant. I know that Timmy has the T2 phaser because he'd already used it. So I use that. Putting a phaser into a chorus is always just the loveliest thing. A little bit of echo. There we go. We've got a pad. I wrote the initial pad stuff with this sound, then realized that I wanted more. I wanted to layer it up with something else. So I added in an FME sound. Because there's nothing that says 80s like an FM sound. Took the pair of them, put them into a bus. Which is running an overdrive. Again, you may think they sound nicer in solo without this overdrive, but in a mix, it gives them character. And then they're compressed together as a pair. So when the mix is up and you see them, you'll see that you've got the throat pad, the FM double, they're panned out. Massive, or maybe as far as 50%, but they're panned out. And then put through this and compressed together, and then off to reverb and what have you. It allows the layers to work together but separately. But this decision is not made until I'm getting into more of a mix process. If I fuss too much about making these decisions early in the process, then I'm going to bog down in that rather than moving forward with the vision. Now, I haven't forgotten we're going to get into story. Mixers often need a little bit more encouragement to be strolling along. So this one's just creating automatic basic tritone chord We are in C minor. It's popping it through a simple arpeggiator that's not doing anything interesting at all with it, just to create movement. It is not fed any unique notes at any point in time. The notes it's fed are largely existing pads or existing bass lines. All it's doing is adding inside the middle of the mix, and deliberately just chosen a couple of frequencies where it's important, and bink, off it goes. The last part composed was this, deliberately created a rather moogie sort of a lead. Very Tomita, that Tomita whistle. Not that that was the plan, but it's just, initially I thought, oh, we'll go with a fatter, moogier sound. You think Moog, you think fat, stentorian sounds. But I've got a pretty fat mix already, so this just needs to add that little bit of something. And that's actually one of the things that Timmy commented on when he heard the first unmixed version, was like, oh, I like that. And it just sits there towards the end, easy to miss, but you don't miss it because it just helps pick out the melodic movement of what's going on at the time. It's a monophonic sound. It's sometimes fed polyphonic lines. Sometimes I moved sounds around a little bit just to take advantage of how that goes. It's put through a fuzz, because we want to narrow down its frequency range. We don't want it out here again, just like pads. It's got one job to do in one fairly well-defined place, which, as you'll see here, again, so while the scream turns, and what was it? I think it was it is a square. Well, while we've got the square and the scream squaring our square, cubing it, the trimmer is essentially creating it more like a sine wave. Now, you might go, hey, you're all about efficiency, why don't you just use a sine wave in the first place? Well, if I'd known that's what I was going for, I might have, but there's a fair chance I probably wouldn't have in the end. I may have started there thinking, oh, I want more like a whistle-type sound, but then I would have been like, this doesn't really cut it. So it's that combination of something that doesn't sound like it has much in the way of harmonic overtones, sawtoothy, sounds like a sine wave, but they're there. They're just heavily filtered. So again, trimmer to the rescue. This is a weird sound, and deliberately so. You often hear the delay pulled out of tune. I called it Japanarium because at times it's not dissimilar to a sound that Japan used a time or two. It wasn't deliberate, but I heard it and it's like, ooh, good enough for Richard, good enough for me. I used Distort Chain, not my favourite, but I figured, well, Timmy either has it or can get it because I believe it's a freebie. I used the ring modulator in here. So it takes an otherwise bland sound. We don't want to overdo it, but add some of that belly sound, which is where the beginning of that Japany sound comes from. Some light overdrive just to really kind of, and then drunken delay. It's just used at the intro and then through some quieter parts. But it just adds that extra little bit of interest. It's not doing anything grandly musical, just picking out existing notes from the arrangement, and just gives us that sense of mystery, because I wanted the piece to have a feeling of kind of mystery. If it's going to be called the Plane Rider, this great big flat computer Tron-like plane with purple lines on it and some critter or character moving around on it, there's mystery in that. So this helps just put that sense of mystery in there. It's the little sounds that actually help define your story. And then this morning, as I listened to some of the transitions in parts, particularly in the larger part, the sort of instrumental type break, which is where you begin to hear that Moogie lead sound, I just felt like a little bit of extra something just to transfer. So I ended up putting in a riser. And again, just through 30 years of having done this, I know what sound I want to hear there. It's very easy, especially when you're beginning, to go, what's the cliche sound everybody uses because that's the right sound? Probably a bad plan, because if everybody does it, there's no way you can be unique. Now, in reality, that isn't unique, but it's not that cliched EDM riser that everybody's done to sound exactly the same. I recently wrote an article on my website, easy to spot. It's the one about hiding in the middle, about how fish, when they're super frightened, all just turn into what's called a bait ball. They all push into the middle. Don't be that guy when you're making little decisions, especially about things like ornamentation in your mix, in your piece. Don't make the cliched decisions. Make decisions that are familiar by all means. This riser is very familiar. Like if I introduce some weird random element at that point, a great big Chinese gong or something, it'd be like, where the fuck's that come from? So there are some elements of this which are tried and true, safe, comfortable. But that's not your typical EDM riser. But you know what? It does fit with the idea of a Tronny racer type thing. It does do that. I went straight into the crush, kill, destroy approach to compression there, because those sorts of sounds can get mighty unruly mighty fast. I just want to jam it down. It has a flanger. That's part of why it will get very unruly, and part of why it's got that cool kind of sound. So if we were to listen to it without, but the flanger will do some nasty things level-wise, so might as well just right from the beginning, and that way it's going to behave. Mastered, just compressor, again, not looking to control levels. This compressor here is never, ever, 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 ever about controlling master levels. If you do that, you're fucked up. This is about groove. So when our piece was playing, better when we've got a beaty bit. Hear how that suddenly gets up. We're emphasizing our rhythm there. I'm deliberately got my threshold as low as I can and my ratio as high as I can. I'm not looking to make this sound nice. That's the last thing I want to do right now, is to make it sound nice. I just want to get to that point where you want to jump up and dance. Even if it's not a dancey track, we still want to... Some tracks absolutely don't work this way. The stuff like Sleep Call that I did, which is very kind of plains of new agey sound, you don't do this, not this. That there you can have issues with pads and other sounds just peaking, in which case I might just go straight to a crush, kill, destroy approach, but very, very subtly. So here we then just want to set our threshold, which was somewhere around there. So it's just giving us a tiniest little bit of a flicker. If we are seeing hear how it starts to sound lifeless. Even though I'm not doing a lot of heavy work here, it sounds lifeless. So just a flicker on top there is enough. You're just emphasizing whatever that groove is. Now I've reminded myself to come back to this. Now with the kick and bass, I put them into a pair. So I put them into a bus. I had compressions on various, like on each of them, but putting them together was far smarter. So what happens is, if we just solo this, I know when it's bypassed it sounds louder, but that's not the point. The point there is that when it's bypassed, it kind of sounds... But when that's in, the kick drum actually pushes the bass out of the way. That where the two hit together, you end up with a mighty thump, because you've got bass and kick together. But they then just get that bass out of the way. So it's good to have its pulse, but it moves its pulse just slightly out of the way as the kick comes through. It just pulls this out here, so it allows us to take advantage of a little bit of the space in that kick drum, and it's kind of like doing a side chain thing where you go every time the kick drum comes through, but it's much kinder doing it this way. I loathe where I turn on EDM retro wave tracks and every time the kick drums, and it's not from the kick drum, it's because they put the pads through, and every time the kick drum has a awful technique. Clever. The first time or two we heard it, clever, but you can get some of the same feel this way, just by, say, bussing a pair of instruments like that together and then just letting them do that in a minor way. Just accentuates, which is exactly what we've done with our compressor here. Back to the master, EQ. After you've compressed, you can flatten your sound a little bit. I'm always going to low cut, always roll off. It's about 30 hertz. There's nothing of any use under there. You've really got a sub good enough to be playing that stuff. Brilliant, good on you, you're a champion. But most subs don't play anything useful down there. I always look to brighten your mix, because it's all that detail. Easier to think that when we master or we finalize our track that it's all about the... And you hear a lot of people when they've done that they go and they do this kind of thing. Yeah, I feel like I've got the world's largest penis right now. But have I done anything useful? No. Because when we listen to that somewhere else, it's going to sound more like you shit your pants. Because it's just going to... And the rest of the mix is gone. Because you have to turn your masters down, or your masters are doing so much limiting that they're just given up, left the building. Your studio monitors, hopefully, as long as you're not using rockets, are nice and bright and clear. And that's the sound you need to hear out of them, nice and bright and clear. Maybe even excessively bright and excessively clear, because when you take it through to my Sony, it's going to strip a lot of those high mids out. You'll get that tss frequency, but you're going to lose a lot of the clarity stuff. You're going to get a lot of the because it's chasing that. It's all and in those systems. That's what most people listen to if they're not actually using a laptop speaker. So, bright and clear is your job. I've not tested this overnight, so this decision here could well be wrong. Logic tells me it's wrong, but I'm going to give it a go. If it sounds a bit too much, it could well be that this button should have been in the off position. But you'll see that I've boosted, we're in the 90. I was actually originally starting in the 120. I'm not looking to make subs excited here. I'm looking for punch. So that's where I'm getting the most punch. I broadened off the cue here, the width of my boost. So that way we would pull in kick and bass together. It's a wrong decision. I will have no dramas with tomorrow morning coming in, turning the button off and re-rendering. Do not get welded to your early mixes. Otherwise you won't change them. Same as if you, with your arrangements, if you get welded to them, you've got some kind of unhealthy codependent relationship with them. Don't be that way. Listen to them objectively. How does this sound up against my Jackson Browne record? Easy to say, but they don't fucking compare, Benedict, because he's Jackson Browne and he's really boring. It's old-fashioned shit you shouldn't listen to. Yeah, well, fuck off. No, it does compare to a Jackson Browne record because it's entirely possible that somebody who's going to listen to this track may just have been listening to Jackson Browne before. And you know what? Jackson Browne made a lot more money than you. So his records generally sound good, whether you like them or not. So don't get welded to your mixes or your arrangements. Be prepared to change them in the morning, or even a week later if you realise it. I'm always listening in the lounge, and that's where I make a lot of my mix decisions about, was that mix right? Was that arrangement right? Does the piece flow? Is the story good? Little tiny bit of stereo widenification. I felt especially in that sound that just boosts the leads, that it kind of put it out there, gave it a little bit more of the EDM-y sound, which people are going to love. Pushed my masters up a few dB, so this is just getting into about the -1 dB territory. So you see one little flicker here, that's it. That's it. I could have used another limiter which has tubey stuff to it. Didn't really feel like it was necessary here. Plus, if Little Timmy's going to open this, I don't want to send him something he probably doesn't have. He's likely to have most, if not everything, that I've got here because I've either used something that he sent me and my system opened up fine, or something that he can probably get for free, or worst comes to the worst, duplicate himself. It would be mean, I think, for me to make something that is of no use to him when he gets it back. That's the rack. Here endeth part 1. Here beginneth part 2. Go back a little bit, hit pause, go get a cup of coffee, have a pee. This bit is about the arrangement and story. So, story. When I say the word story, I see people immediately go, oh, but I have to write a book, and I can't write, and I don't want to write a story. Story is not. Little Timmy woke up in the morning, brushed his hair, ate a jam sandwich, went to catch the bus, missed the bus. You can write pieces of music like that. The Beatles did it. Strauss, I think it was, did it as well. A few people have done that. It's a tone poem, pastoral music and what have you. It's not an illegitimate technique, but it's not really what I mean by story. Story doesn't have to be clearly defined like that. Story is an image. I've given you the image we had here, the plane rider. So we've got a vast open plain. It's in that magenta-y purple colour that retro wavers love. And we've got some character, probably in a vehicle, who rides along. That is it for story in this case. There's nothing about what he ate for lunch, what planet his parents came from. It's just an image. We then look at how can I represent some parts of that image in sound. If we were a painter, we think it'll be fairly obvious. I'll draw some round things and call the fuckers wheels. Get them somewhere near the purple lines. Yep, a little hard to draw round sounds in round things like wheels in sound. But we could take some elements of that. Planes. Action. Like movement. Actual movement. I know this doesn't sound anything like what the piece is about, but that's all our movement. That's how we show the movement, the drama, the tension of what's going on. How we play things, repetition. How our sounds feel. So adding that together with whichever is playing lead. So you see here, it's taking this lead line. Here, it's taking this sound. So we've got one sound doubling up, but it just helps add some body to that, as I said before. So we're only looking to be, what are the elements in my scene? It's more like an abstract painting now than a photograph type painting. What are the elements in my scene? At the beginning we've got this plane, that arresting sound with the drum playing up high. That sort of says, oh, something's going on. Those funny low sounds that are all drunken belly, again, is adding mystery. Some fog around our plane. That's our first idea. That's Timmy's idea. That's where he said, here's what's going on, and that's all it is. It's just this. Alright, let's try it. Even though that's solid, the kick's still coming through because it's triggered by a generator. That's actually the whole piece, right there. It'd be kind of dull if it was like 4 bars long. So we move it out and we expand on these ideas. We say, right now we're looking at this part of the scene. Now we're going to look at that part of the scene. So he shows his idea here. Great. Well done. So this actually represents the character in the scene, which is that car that rides along the plain. And here we've put the car and the plane together. Easy to say, oh, but that's cool, that's great, and I'll just play that bit over and over for 3 minutes. Not a good plan. Because it's boring as batshit, and you know what? When you look at a good picture or a good scene, there's a lot in it. So what are some of the other elements of this play? Now, Timmy had already started to show some here. Now, remember in his original one, Timmy just kind of dropped everything and just had this open bit. Initially I thought, oh geez, he really ran out of steam there. Now maybe that's exactly what happened. Maybe he just ran out of steam. But what I heard was, this is telling me that I've got a character doing something in an open scene. So it's that. Now this is where I've added in a second part. It sounds to some extent like a second idea, because we've got this new quacky brass sound. But we've kept the same scene because we've got the same bass line and actually taken the first statement. See, this here has so I've swapped the first half of his statement for the quacky brass. He'd already done it here by using only the second halves of his statement. I then took advantage of that to add another idea, which echoes the main statement. It actually happens to echo it before it, but we've already heard it. So it coming in first is like somebody saying what you said, only saying it slightly different. It's bloody annoying when people do that. So here how it's the same shape. I deliberately didn't look too closely to the notes, I just wanted to get that feel. This repeats. Musically, it would have been nicer to add something else, but I didn't want to add too much complexity. So I've repeated, but I've played a sound effect here to remind us that we're moving and changing and sliding and what have you. Next section. This is where we do sort of step away. It's in the middle of the piece, literally the middle of the piece. It's the first place where we've really got counterpoint. Counterpoint being that we have a melody and then we have another line that's doing something different. In this case it's very simple. We've got the lower part which is rising, which is building tension. Then we've got an upper part which goes down. So initially they just work towards each other. Very simple harmony, very, very simple harmony. And so I've taken the various parts, the upper and lower lines, and spread them out across the instruments. The bass even is playing that as well. But because it's a monophonic bass sound, I've just played with the notes to make them trigger more interestingly. We could go without the bass altogether, and I composed it without the bass. I just thought it sort of kept the energy a little bit more. There's absolutely no reason why you couldn't make the decision to do something like muting that section. Oh, by the way, in terms of neatness, when I've decided that something is no longer going to be there, no longer serves a purpose, I will delete it. I will not leave it sitting in the mix muted, because it's just mess. The brain's got to process it. Whereas if it's just not there anymore, the brain knows what's being said there, which is nothing, which is relevant. Whereas if it's seeing this, it's saying something, but it's not saying that. I have to double process. Not a good plan. So when something's no longer needed in a mix, if you've decided, okay, now that's it, that's the line, delete that bit. Get rid of it. If it's something you think you might want to use later, you can always copy it off over there, past your end marker. Not a biggie. It can sit out there until you realise that it was a waste of time in the first place. So delete things you're not using. And that's the drop. So we've got this bit here, which is the breather, but this is focusing on, to a fair extent, the openness of our plane, of our environment. It's also a little... It's not full of lovely green trees and babbling brooks, is it? It's a little angular and kind of empty and a little forbidding. And that's the feel that we get through with this. So all of that serves a purpose, even though it's pretty simple. At this point, because we're going down in energy, we've got to add something new and of interest. It would be easy to just carry this little fella through, the poppy thing, and go all the way through it. Sometimes it's the right decision. If you listen to a lot of trance, it's often the wrong decision. Because again, all they've got is their 8 or 16 bars of 256 different musical lines all playing exactly the same shit, and they just drag it out. So in these down parts, in trying to keep the energy up, they actually put up parts at the same time. Yes, there are times where it's good, but you've got to let go. Introduce something different. Now the difference here is this falling melodic line, which is actually driven by our and we know it's driven by that because it's the most exciting and it's the newest sound at that point. It does weird pitchy things because Timmy had got the bass line and the melodic line from the beginning doing the pitch drop thing. So I carried that across here. By carrying elements that we've used before somewhere else, we tie things together. So where this element is actually new, we haven't used that line before. Not exactly. We haven't used that line before, so it sounds new. I actually took the pitch droppy stuff from here and whacked it here. So it carries a familiarity of this. Whoop, 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 is same thing. So that is new and different. It stands out, even though it's not the most dramatic instrument. It's also backed by my buddy here. Same sound, I've just used it as a string sound at that point. If I wanted to, I could have gotten into a little bit more cleverer and started putting embellishments on this. So I could have done something like... This may sound like shit, I haven't tested it. that sort of thing you can do. It just adds a little bit more embellishment, and possibly I should have done it. But being this kind of music, it tends to be fairly stark, and I wanted to emphasise stark at this point. Flat, empty plain, maybe a couple of spiky things on it. Just remember, it's not a nice green garden. Comes to Normally in my music I don't do the drop thing that much, but this has still got elements of dance music, and I know that Timmy likes that kind of stuff. So there's no harm in doing that. There was a slightly dead spot in here that needed to transition, so it was the right thing. And then we come back to restating our thing. So, because this is our chorus here, that's the bulk of our piece there. So we restate it here, except we now have this guy playing. So he's doing essentially what I started to do here, just adding a little bit more embellishment to the piece. Cool. It just adds more at that point. So that's actually the high point of our piece. If it was a classic rock song, that's where Slash walks out, hops up on top of the piano, spreads his legs this far apart, and starts playing, up here, because that would just be crude. So that's the high point of our piece. After that, it's ad-lib to fade. Could be chorus to fade or ad-lib to fade. In this case, it's more chorus to fade, but I'm just using because this section here, the guitar solo section, was just so grand, we got to give people a little bit of a break. Sometimes you hammer straight from that straight into the big chorus. I kind of didn't want to, so there's a different little bit here. So it's like, oh, that's the chorus, but there's got a little bit of a differenty bit, and there's another little differenty bit on the end here, which is all existing material, but just moved around like this. Just moves those notes around. It's using the lead and the brass sounds all together, and just so that's just our playoff. We can choose to do interesting things in our playoff, which can be a solo, which is what this instrument's doing. It's using the existing material and turning it into a seemingly well-executed solo. Where is that melody in this material? It's not actually, but it's the top lines, it's the top notes of those chords. But when you play them out and turn them into a solo, we've cheated and given ourselves the illusion that we've got a semi-competent key prodder doing us a nice little solo on there. It's all incredibly safe because it's all the very same notes that we've got. It just adds a sense of flowing melody, and it makes this piece flow as it goes through to its end. And you see that I take the more moving lead line and turn it into a more static lead line as we come to the end. I want to slow it down. I'm a big believer in pieces having finishes. The fade to nothing, or the just drop everything and go doof, 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 doof for another quarter of an hour until everyone gets bored and turns it off, is not always the best way of doing it. The fade was commonly because bands had this awful habit of writing songs that were longer than 3 minutes, because they still had stuff to say and do, and that's what you do when you do proper music. Radio said, yeah, look, you've got this 4-minute song, and we love the end of it, the bit where you go dooba-dooba-dee, dooba-dooba-dee, but dooba-dooba-dee, that's just so much fun. But it won't get on the radio, so we'll just have you sing the chorus and turn the volume down. Not terrible, but when that's the only mix, the only sort of arrangement decision you've got, you got some problems. The same with, as I say, in EDM, it's just like, oh, get to the end of everything and just play. Pretend that we've given the DJ a mix break. How many DJs are going to be playing your song? Pete Tong on the phone to you saying, hey mate, I love you, I love your track. Can you get me a DJ mix with mix breaks and a doof 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 on the end? I know you'd love for that to be happening. But if Pete or Carl Cox aren't on the phone to you, don't make that your go-to, because it's a mistake. Work out some kind of ending, and that ending is how you're going to round off your picture. Our guy, our character, our vehicle, travelling on the suitably retro wave pinky purple plane. How does it end? I've given us a simple musical conclusion. It's not the world's best cadence, but it's a simple musical conclusion that says, we're finished. And I know that to many of you, you go, oh, the idea of finishing my piece, that's like saying, it's like, it's got to go on forever, man, it's music non-stop. And it's like, get the fuck over yourself. Every track finishes, and the finish is super important. Because you know what a good finish does? It makes the person want to go, I want to play this again. If it doesn't have a good finish, it just gets boring and dies. Where's the enthusiasm to say, I want to go again? So, the finish may be simple, but it gives us a slightly different thing, as well as emphasizing one of the landscape that we're in, which is that big open plain. Because at that point here, we're showing our character as being alone and going off into the great open space. That ending will improve the chance of somebody saying, yeah, that was a cool track, because it's interesting from beginning to end. Is it the world's best piece of music? No. But it's a good initial idea. It's a cool idea. Way back here. That's a good idea. I like that. It's got feel. It's got story. Even though we didn't know what the story was, it's got story. So I emphasized that story. I built and extrapolated that story. I painted more shit in to make the story more complete. Now, when you listen to this piece, you may not get any of that sense of the picture that I'm drawing. You may sit here and think, sounds to me like Egyptian pharaohs playing with their pussycats. Great, good. That's good. You've got your own story, but you've got story. You've attached story to this because it's touched you in the feeling bone. Job done. You don't have to agree with the story that the composer put on it. The fact that it's touched you in the feeling bone means that you feel that there is story in here. That's all it's about. My story is merely a serving suggestion that might kick off your feelings. But if your feelings are different, the story that you give, the narrative that you attach, the feelings that rise out of you from this piece are strong enough to make you go, oh, I like that, I want to experience it again. Job done. I think that really has covered most of the points. It's a pretty long video, even for me, but we've covered a lot of stuff. I will strongly encourage you, rather than going, oh, that shit's boring, I don't want to watch it anymore, come back again, because this is 20, 30 years worth of learning being put into about an hour and a half. So take your time, go over and understand again what those things are about. And as always, you're watching this, you find something interesting, even if you don't love the piece that I wrote, you find those ideas interesting and you want to understand how to make more of them yourself. This is why God, or Mr. YouTube, left space below for you to say, Dear Benedict, I love you. I'm trying to understand this thing. Or Dear Benedict, I love you. Can you help me with this thing? You have a good day now. Thank you.